A while back, I made a video talking about Ida, Albert, and just Palisman in general, and man, did you guys like this video. But since the second half of Season 1 has aired since I posted that video, and Dana has also had her Reddit AMA, I figured it would be nice to do a little revisit on the topic of Palisman, and if Luce will either get or make her own Palisman at some point in the series. So what new information have we been given? Most notably, someone asked a question during the AMA about Palisman specifically. What is a Palisman? What are they made of? How do they work? Can they use magic? To which Dana responded, a Palisman is our world's equivalent of a witch's familiar. They act as familiars and double as magical staves that house their own source of power outside of a witch's bile sac. They're not all powerful, but they can still do some cool stuff. Typically, a witch will carve their Palisman from a special type of wood in their teens. This can either be done at school or with parental supervision. That is, if that precious resource is still around. So there is a lot to unpack here, but first I want to do a little follow-up on my previous Palisman video and how this applies to Ida and Albert. We know from Escape of the Palisman that Ida created Albert from the branch of an ancient tree. Now at the time we didn't know if there were alternative ways for witches to get their staves and Palisman. As Ida stated in Witches Before Wizards, witches obtain their staves after completing school, and we knew that Ida didn't finish school. But we now know that witches can carve their Palisman on their own time with parental supervision. But this means that Ida likely obtained a staff and carved Albert after the events we saw in the flashback from Youngblood Old Souls. As we see, Lilith and Ida are shown training with a broom and a mop. And while both seem to imbue the objects with some sort of magic, they don't appear capable of casting spells. This would indicate that neither of the Clawthorne sisters had a staff prior to their duel and subsequently Ida's curse. Lilith likely received hers after joining the Emperor's Coven, while Ida likely left school after her curse and obtained a staff and carved Albert through her own means. But let's unpack more of Dana's response. A Palisman is our world's equivalent of a witch's familiar. They act as familiars and double as magical staves that house their own source of power outside of a witch's bile sac. This adds to Ida carving Albert after being cursed. Since a Palisman acts as a witch's familiar, I definitely see Ida leaning into her owl theme with her Palisman. I mean, she does go around calling herself Ida the Owl Lady, proudly displays her wanted poster with the same name on it, refers to her house as the Owl House, and has an owl door decoration named Hootie, so it doesn't seem that out of character for her. The other interesting part about the rest of this response is that they act as familiars and double as magical staves that house their own source of power outside of a witch's bile sac. Now that Ida can't perform magic through the casting of spell circles, she'll be relying on Luce to teach her how to use magic glyphs. But Ida will still be able to cast spells through Albert. After all, we saw in Luce's fight with Belos that she is able to cast spells through the staff. So Ida will likely be able to do the same. So while Ida may not be as powerful as we have seen her, she won't be powerless. Another interesting part about this response is that Palisman house their own source of power outside of a witch's bile sac. I just mentioned how we've seen Luce cast spells through Albert, but we've also seen Belos absorb that power, supposedly at least. When we are first introduced to Belos, we see him panting heavily, then being presented with what appears to be a Palisman. Upon breaking it open, we see that there is green magic within, which Belos is able to absorb through his eyes, changing their color. So Palisman and their power seems to be connected to Belos as well, with him needing it to sustain himself in some way. This will definitely be elaborated on at some point, and with Ida and Luce still having the whistle that they received from the Bat Queen, who will no doubt be making more appearances, I'm wondering if she will discover what Belos has been doing with discarded Palisman. Now the last part of this response that I want to discuss before talking about how it pertains to Luce is the resource that Palisman are carved from. Typically, a witch will carve their Palisman from a special type of wood in their teens. This can either be done at school or with parental supervision. That is, if that precious resource is still around. Now we already know that Ida carved Albert from the branch of an ancient tree, so we can assume that there is a special species of tree that Palisman are carved from. Whether there is only one tree or not, we'll see. But from Dana's response, we know that this resource is dwindling to the point that it may not even exist anymore. Now when looking back through Season 1, the only witches that we actually saw who had a staff were Ida, Lilith, Belos, and the mention of Willow's dad's having one. Belos' staff is interesting because it appears man-made and mechanical and not wooden like Ida's, Lilith's, and presumably Willow's dad's. Perhaps this is because that resource for Palisman has already dwindled to the point where Belos had to make his own staff. However, Belos has been in power for at least 50 years, and I doubt he was without a staff during that time. Additionally, Lilith and Ida were able to make their Palisman, so that resource was still around during their youth. But Belos could also be the cause of this resource of Palisman dwindling. We've seen him absorbing the magic of discarded Palisman, so maybe he is going after the trees that create them. But how will this affect Luce and her ability to get her own Palisman? First and foremost, after Youngblood Old Souls, seeing Luce use Albert to cast her spells during the fight with Belos, Luce could definitely benefit from having an additional source to cast magic from. Plus, Ida was proud of and impressed with Luce to the point of making her a witch's wool cape already. And if you think back to Witches Before Wizards, where Ida said Luce had to earn her staff rather than through completing school, I think Ida would be more than willing to help Luce in getting her staff and Palisman, considering she went one-on-one with Belos and even got a hit on him. So Luce has clearly shown she is capable of handling herself, and her receiving a staff and Palisman would be a good way to show her growth. But I don't think the most difficult part of this will be convincing Ida. The most difficult part will be finding this ancient tree. And honestly, I could see this being a whole episode or two of Luce and the gang trying to find this tree, and then actually showing the process of carving a Palisman. The fact that Dana alluded to this resource possibly no longer being around when she didn't have to in the first place definitely makes it seem like this will be given a focus at some point. And going back to the Bat Queen and the whistle, Luce and Ida could possibly call on her for assistance in finding this tree and helping Luce. This would be a nice way to bring back the Bat Queen, learn more about Palisman in general, and progress Luce's development. I feel at this point Luce has definitely earned her staff, as Ida first proposed to her in episode 2. Plus, with Luce and Ida now being on a similar level of performing magic, and Luce now being in an interesting position of being both student and teacher to Ida, Luce having a staff would be incredibly beneficial in the two learning to do magic together. As to when Luce will actually get a staff, it may not be for a while. I feel like the idea of Luce getting one will be introduced earlier on, but like I said, this goal will have its own difficulties, so she may not actually get her staff and subsequent Palisman till the end of season 2, or even later season if the show continues on. At this point, staffs and Palisman have been hinted at so much that it makes sense that they'll be a focus in the near future. Add in the fact that we'll be seeing the Bat Queen again at some point, and that Belos has some connection to Palisman, then it seems even more likely. And through these plot threads, I hope Luce will receive her own staff and Palisman to show how far she's come in her training to become a witch. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you have a fantastic day, and until next time guys, take care.